Hi, women of welcome. Good morning. Well, again, I always say good morning, knowing that I'm in Colorado and I'm probably later than so many of you. Um, I'm waiting for Sarah to join. I see Sarah joining. Here, hold on. Let me get Sarah on here. So, Sarah is going to be on here. I'm waiting for Sarah to get on here, but we are going to be talking about week 4.
Oh, I'm basically did it. Looky there. Nice. That's fantastic.
We were just talking before we got on here, ladies. We were talking about how we just don't know what we're doing when it comes to social. So
I'm going to turn on a light.
Sarah's going to turn on a light. We are going to be talking about week 4 of In Pursuit of Peace for the next, 20 minutes or so. So hang with us if you have started the study or you're interested in the study. The thing that I love about In Pursuit of Peace is it's a quick 4-week study, so you can jump in with us now and just have great dialogue and ask questions. We would love for you to be interactive with us on this. But it's also something that you can just do with your girls. You can, I do it on my phone in the morning or on your iPad. And then I went to a print shop and had it printed out. We do have print ready files. So if you want a print ready file, you can just say print ready, please. And then we'll email that to you or we'll message it to you. So in any case, thanks for joining us this morning. Hi, Sarah. You got your light on? You're all situated?
I'm good. I'm good. It's nice to see you here on the interwebs. This is where we hang out with people these days.
Yes. And it looks like we're going to continue to be that way for a while, right? Ugh.
I don't hear that. I don't hear you saying that right now.
Oh, ladies, we are pursuing peace in the midst of craziness in our country and in our relationships, in our homes. I'm sure many of you, if you're homeschooling, like, let us know. I mean, Sarah and I are both doing the in school, at home learning circus. I mean,
virtual learning,
is that what it
virtual
is?
virtual logging in. I don't know how much we're learning, but we're there.
Gosh, it's called Tell Me What's Due, and I am going to make sure that that's turned in so that my student doesn't fail. My kid doesn't fail because of me. Anyway. Okay, y'all, we're on week 4. Week 4. Creating peace in every place. We have been we've talked about week 1, his legacy of peace. The next week, week 2, which is probably my favorite one, is peacekeeping versus peacemaking. Week 3, becoming a peacemaker. All of these, if you're not doing it with somebody, we have done videos for each week of these, and you can look at those in our IGTV or in our private Facebook group. But now we're on to week 4, creating peace in every place. And I love this because each day we take a different sphere to challenge you to create peace in. So this week's theme verse is Isaiah 52:7 that I'm going to read for us now. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who bring good news, who publishes peace, who brings good news of happiness, who publishes salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns through him. Isaiah 52:7. So let's dive in to day 1.
Yes, making peace with God. So there's a paragraph in the study that just really stuck out to me, and I think connects with a lot of us because it starts out saying, as you start to create peace in your sphere of influence, you'll hit inevitable road bumps. I love that word inevitable because I think I tend to be a person who's like, I'm sure this is going to be fine. I'm sure we'll get started and these things I'm learning, this stuff that makes sense to me, I'm sure it'll make sense to everybody else. And then I tend to be always surprised by what are actually inevitable road bumps. And it says, so it continues, and here's where you might be easily convinced that a past sin is the reason for your perceived failure to be a successful peacemaker. Don't believe this lie for 1 second. The truth is you are forgiven. The truth is God has reconciled every sin through Jesus Christ. Your ability to move forward in the future is not defined by the wars you once waged or raged.
A lot of times I raged those words.
Wait, those words.
Yeah.
And so maybe Bree, you can speak to one of the questions that's in this guide that talks about what lies from the enemy have you believed about the peace you have with God?
Oh, this one is super personal to me, because when we think about how we used to be trained to think about how to create peace, it was that we were waging war on something or someone in order to create peace. And you know what that's like when you start from that perspective of like this passionate, angry perspective. You're not creating a space for peace. What you're doing is you're tearing down something in order to try and clear a path for you to build your own altar of something, you know, instead of collaborating and bringing along somebody. You're really actually doing the opposite. You're tearing down someone. You're waging a war instead of creating a space for peace. And so one of the lies I think I've always believed is that I could not be an effective peacemaker because I had spent a lot of my life being a peacekeeper. And so people are like, why is she talking about this now? She never talked about it before. Or, well, I've seen her do this before. I know she's not like that. Or there would be something in my past that I would believe disqualified me from being effective and useful for the kingdom of God. And anytime you seek to move into new territory that the enemy doesn't want you to be in, the first thing he's going to try and do is discredit you and take down your confidence that you should have in Christ. And so when you think about all these things that keep coming back up, like, I did this, I used to say this, or I'm well known to be like this, what you're really saying, if you're a Christian and you believe that Christ has forgiven you, what you're really saying is you're believing a lie that says that the death of Christ and his resurrection is not enough, that did not cover all of your sins, and that wasn't sufficient for you to be able to move forward in a relationship with the Lord, and that you aren't deserving of peace. And so I think that's a big lie that I had believed kind of my whole life was, all right, well, this big mistake that I made in the past is going to creep up and prevent me from being credible or effective in this space. And yet I feel really called to this space. I know that it's a biblical mandate to be in this space. And I think that's what the enemy is going to do. He's going to tell you that the cross of Christ is not enough. He's going to tell you to pick back up that mistake, that sin, and carry that with you, which will only burden you instead of you walking freely in this relationship with the Lord, where he says, my sacrifice for you was enough. So put it down. I have created peace. You don't have to do anything. You just have to believe in me. You have to ask for forgiveness. You have to believe that I have given you that forgiveness. And it's a perpetual forgiveness. It's not just this one time. His death on the cross did it for everything and everyone. And all we're told is that we're supposed to believe. And so that lie that we're going to be ineffective because of something we've done in our past, and therefore we're not at peace with the Lord, and therefore we're not going to be credible or effective in the future, is a lie from the pit of hell. And we've got to put that down and believe that Christ has created peace, and it's ours for the taking, and we just move forward. So that's always tripped me up in the past. It's probably tripped other people up too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And if you guys have questions or if you have comments, leave them in here, and in the comments, and we'll answer, and we'll try and get to those too. We're going to go on to day 2. So the first day was making peace with God, making peace with family and friends.
Family and friends.
This is where it gets sticky, right? You know, it's like when you're thinking about going out into the world or something like that, it feels very big picture, and you're just like, oh, I'm just going to go. But then when you have to do the nitty gritty work with your family or your friends, people who are really close to you,
Yeah.
That's when it gets like really messy and you feel like the cost is super high to move from that keeper to a maker. And so I love this because you're immediately, usually very emotional when you're entering into these kinds of conversations with close family or friends. And I know I have messed up a lot when I've done this in my effort to help someone see something differently or to engage someone that with something I'm so passionate about and they're just not getting it. Immediately there's like this passionate turns into anger really quickly type thing. And I love in day 2 it says, stick to the transformational tools God has given us in his word. And we talk about that, about putting down our weapons of war and taking up transformational tools. We talk about that, I believe, in week 3. So go back to that and read that. But it says, stick to the transformational tools God has given us in his word. Remain steadfast in prayer. If you're entering into these conversations without being prayerful ahead of time, you will fail. It has to be, the Spirit has to be present. So remain steadfast in prayer. Remind yourself that God is the ultimate peacemaker, and through him, all things are possible. So that impossible conversation that you have to have, prayer, God is the peacemaker, and you're just creating a space to use the transformational tools, the fruit of the Spirit, to enter into that space with people. So Sarah, I'm going to ask you a question from day 3 or day 2.
Yeah.
Day 2. Are there changes you'd like to consider for yourself personally in order to be known as a peacemaker? What are some things that you think you might want to change personally to be considered?
I mean, I feel like when it comes to particularly some of the issues we talk about here, I feel like this has been like a really long journey for me as far as figuring out, I had moments, particularly when I was first kind of learning about different things. I was so shocked about kind of what was happening in places in the world that I didn't know about, that I just felt this sort of low key anger. I feel like all of the time to some extent. And a lot of that would come out around the people I felt safest with. Yeah. And ironically, it was almost sometimes, it was actually like in getting married and having my husband kind of be like, whoa, what is happening? Like, you reined it in. That was kind of this eye opener to me of I want to become, what kind of person do I want to be? And what is that difference between being right or proving a point versus loving people well and being a peacemaker and creating a space that others want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like I have all of those answers at the ready. I think it's an ongoing struggle of when things are really close to your heart and you feel really committed or concerned or you know that there is need for peace in that relationship, or that the stakes feel really high, and so that kind of gets our emotions up higher. I do love that reminder to go back to things in prayer, and I do think there are some relationships that I've had to be more intentional about. If I know I'm going to be with that person, praying about it ahead of time, because I do want that person to know that they are loved. Yeah. And I want that to be more important than whatever conflict or whatever lack of peace there might be in our conversation. And so I think that has been a really important reminder. I mean, and then there's sometimes I just have to hold my tongue. Or I think one of the other changes that I'm still working on making is allowing space sometimes for, in a conversation, not always feeling like, oh, I need to get out everything that I think about this immediately, right? But being able to say, I want to make sure I leave space for them to ask questions. And when I tried that recently and the person did not ask any questions, it was like, then I am not going to respond about this any further, because they are not in a place where they want to talk more about this topic. And explore what might be possible there. So I think, I don't think there's any silver bullet answer to that of how to be, changes in my life to be known as a peacemaker, but I think it's a constant journey of trying to do that.
To me, it sounds like what you're talking about is really having discernment about where people are and what their threshold or capacity and their curiosity is for this area. And a lot of times that is a prayerful, Lord, help develop an interest or a curiosity in them. And there are people that are super passionate about certain things, and yet that they're not approachable. So what does it mean? The fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, all of these, self-control. I'm just thinking, like, are we being approachable? I mean, I think when I first got really in depth into the immigration conversation and people were just like, what are you doing? I mean, have you gone liberal? And I felt like I had to justify myself all in one sitting, and I might have only had like 15 minutes with people. And I just felt like I was on the defensive all the time. And it felt so unfair. And yet I knew I was going to still be doing life with those people. So what would it be like? I finally had to kind of resolve, like you said, to sit back and like listen, be like, all right, what is the Holy Spirit trying to tell me about where this person is at? Mm-hmm. Is this person ready to receive, or does this person want me to just know where they stand and why they are that way, and let them just get it all out? And you know what? That's actually kind of a blessing in disguise, I've discovered, because when people get it all out, you actually, the next time you interact with them, you actually have time to think about the best way to move forward with them, because you've heard what their concerns are. Now, they might feel like I proved a point to them and now they know, but really what that's done is you've gotten now an opportunity to really hear. And so when they have felt heard, they've got all their points out. And so, like, okay, maybe there's some homework I need to do on something. I don't know all the answers to everything, but obviously this is a big issue for them, or this is a big issue. I'm going to go back and research a little bit. So the next time we have a conversation, I could gently and dispassionately just say, I heard you say last time that this was a concern. I just want you to know, like, I really care about safe borders too, because safe borders matter for people on both sides, and and whatever that may be. So what I hear you saying is just timing and discernment and listening well allows you to be able to create a space for peace in the future. You don't have to like eat the whole steak that in that one sitting, in that one drive to the mall, or whatever it is,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, it's helpful to be able to take that recentering to focus on my love for this person and my commitment to peace in this space. And what does that look like? It doesn't mean just listening and taking it and then like, okay, I'll never speak of it again because I don't want to create conflict. But there is this element of being able to trying to grow and saying, I'm going to pay attention to what's happening all around me. So that I know where the best energy is used in that conversation, if that makes sense. Because I don't want to just go back and forth with someone for no broader purpose. I want to actually be working to creating, a place that's inviting and it creates a deeper connection between us, even if we go through conflict in that specific spot.
And just like what you're doing is you're creating that space instead of trying to like take someone down and wage some kind of war, to where then when you're leaving that place with that person, it's a space of tension and it's a space that's untouchable because it's just so sensitive. Whereas if we're entering with a posture of prayer and discernment and listening well, you can revisit that space because you've cleared space for dialogue and for peace. And you don't have to prove yourself in any way, this is where the Spirit comes in, like everybody's on a journey. And one of the things that we've talked about in this study is just entering into peacemaking with a humble spirit. And being humble about these things allows you to remember. Last week we talked about the effectiveness of peacemaking is in part due to our remembering well. And I love that. Go back and visit week 3, because it was so, to me, it was like, okay, remember that you have been on a journey. And
Yes.
and you were on a journey that took a little while too, and we're all still on a journey. So having grace for people in that, and just remembering you were once there too, and you still have a long way to go. So humility also plays a big role in that too.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Day 3 is talking about making peace in your community, which is kind of that next, we sort of start personal with God and then out to our family and friends. And now we're going out to that next ring, which is making peace in your community. So this part from the study talks about that as believers, sometimes we're too easily tempted to seclude ourselves in comfortable Christian bubbles. We insulate our families in order to feel safe and secure from as many outside influences as possible. But in doing so, we do a great disservice to our neighborhoods and communities. As image bearers, we were designed to actively participate in the flourishing of our cities. Mm-hmm. Part of that means getting closer in proximity to people who aren't like you. Proximity to people who aren't like you, people in your city who work and live differently than you do. And it talks about in this day of the study how even when the people of God were living in exile, God tells them to invest in their communities. And so there's something to be said for, even though they kind of knew this is not our permanent home, this is not where we are, that we've been told to, seek the flourishing of the city around us. And I think there is definitely an ideology or a temptation or kind of an influence of this, trying to keep our families and our community sort of protected from all outside influences. But what we find when we connect with people who aren't like us or people who live differently than us is that proximity, it really changes our perceptions of some of the things that we have thought we've always known, because people are looking at the same world from very different vantage points. There's a quote by Shane Claiborne that we love that talks about, I've come to see that the great tragedy in the church is not that rich Christians do not care about the poor, but that rich Christians do not know the poor. And that is such it really pinpoints part of the issue is like, we don't necessarily not care about other people and their problems or their perspectives, but when they're not part of our life, when they're not sitting at our dinner tables, when they're not at school with our kids, when they're not connected in our church communities, then it's very easy to kind of otherize or separate ourselves from what's going on there. And it's not a lack of compassion necessarily, but it is a lack of connection that leads to these kinds of divides. And so one of the questions in the study says, what fears do you have when you consider getting in closer proximity to people who aren't like you? You want to take that one, Bree?
Well, I would say that my number one fear is that I don't have anything to offer them. I remember when I first started teaching parenting classes at a homeless shelter for mothers. And I thought, I come from a very privileged background. I've never been a single mother. I've never been homeless. And I just remember showing up to teach my first parenting class, and I was in tears in my car because I was like, Lord, what do I have to offer these women? These women are survivors. These women have seen things I could never imagine. Why am I doing this? What am I doing here? Like, they're going to think I'm ridiculous. And what ended up happening, obviously, is that the Lord used us as mothers to bind us together. And there was a perspective that I had that they could learn from. And there was so much from their perspective that they had that I learned from. And it the Lord just did something really beautiful. And I would say another thing, again, it's a fear that I have, is that I'm going to mess up and I'm going to offend somebody. And I think that is something that really cripples people from entering and engaging with other people. I'm not going to do it right. And I'm actually going to offend somebody. I'm going to do more harm than I'm going to do help. And I remember talking with a group of church ladies about a family who was in need of some meals for a foster family. They'd just gotten a placement, and they were like, well, we have no idea. We know they need meals, but we don't know what to bring them. And we don't want to pester them, but I'm sure with kids, there's allergy. And there was just like this whole litany, like, of reasons why they weren't just dropping off a meal. And what I will tell you is that family was like, no one's dropping off meals and we're just drowning. And so you have people, they'd be happy with anything, So your fear of not doing it well or not knowing how to do it perfectly will paralyze you and make you ineffective in serving other people and getting close. So we got to get over the fear that we're inadequate, because God makes us adequate. And we have to get over the fear of doing it perfectly, or that we're going to offend people. Because what I have found is when I offend people, again, it goes back to that being humble, is saying, I don't know if I'm doing this right. Please let me know if I'm saying this wrong. I mean, I can't tell you how many in the last year or two, how many times I've called one of my Black friends and said, I'm trying to do all the work that I can. So I don't want to be pestering you with questions. But am I saying this wrong? Like, I don't want to offend you, so I'm going to say it as it is, but just please know my heart. And I can't tell you how many times when you come at it with a posture of humility and you just overabundantly lean into being teachable, that creates something that being completely absent never would be able to do,
Yeah, absolutely. We made some choices in our family, really ever since we've been married, to live in communities that where everyone looks different than us and is from a different socioeconomic background. And I remember in particular, before we had kids, lots of folks asked us, like, well, once you have children, what are you going to do? Where are you going to send your kids to school? And it's been an interesting journey in that sense of like recognizing that there have and are been concerns or challenges or questions about living, across cultures and across class. But even as we've had our kids and we've chosen to put them in public school and to let them live in this sort of different kind of context than what maybe my husband and I, our backgrounds are,
right.
It's been very interesting to realize how many things I think that I was maybe nervous about what my kids would question or be exposed to or, have as part of their experience. How many conversations then it's opened up with our kids about things in the world and the different perspectives and why things might be different for some kids or different for them, or all of these kinds of things that I think I couldn't quite imagine before we were in that place. But I know from my own experience, and I hope as I raise my kids in that environment, that there continues to be this connection between being proximate to people who are different than you gives you an expanded and more robust view of the world, of God, and of the people around you. And that's, I think, sometimes we, those fears they are real. And so there's not, but they're keeping us maybe from so much more richness that we don't even know because it's maybe unfamiliar or uncommon.
Well, and that what God has called us to. It keeps us from what God is calling us to do. And that leads us into day 4, as far as like making peace in the world. It says, without a close proximity to others, without relationships that anchor our perceptions, we start to fear those who aren't like us. Mm-hmm. And we know that those who aren't like us are still made in the image of God and have the same value to Him. And therefore, what are we fearing? Are we fearing a perception, or do we have a relationship with someone that's anchoring our reality about them or about that community or any of all that? What is anchoring you? Is it a perception? Is it a narrative? Is it a media headline? What is it that's anchoring you? If it's not biblical, if you haven't gotten your face in the Bible to know that that's what's anchoring you, or you're not in relationship with somebody and that's not anchoring you, then you've got to recalibrate about, whatever's happening there. So on day 4, it says, we're talking about peace in the world, which just can feel incredibly overwhelming.
Yeah.
Because, and I'll read a little part of this day, and it says, we're on day 4 of In Pursuit of Peace. That's what Sarah and I are talking about. It says, the challenges people face in this world are overwhelming. Every day we see a new tragic headline that seems impossible to believe. And yet the headlines, the happenings continue. Our world is in desperate need of shalom. People need Jesus. He is the hope of the world, and as his followers, we are to be his hands and feet. We are made to enter into these places. So just take that right there. You are made to enter into these places. God has constantly been calling his people into hard places. We're made for this. Okay? You are made for this. Ephesians 6:15 tells us that the armor of God fits our feet with readiness given by the gospel of peace. This is the mission of the church. Individually, you cannot be everywhere and involved in everything. We talk about that a lot when people say, well, why is immigration your biggest priority? And it's like, you know what? It's one of the many priorities, one of the many human dignity issues that the church is called into. It just happens to be our passion. Our passion doesn't have to be your passion. Our priority doesn't have to be your priority, but we're all one body. And so we're all supposed to know what each other is doing and be aware, right? That's how we're effective. Not everyone's supposed to play the same part, right? So identify your passions and prayerfully find your place. It will be our proximity to these painful places that shifts the balance towards peace. There's not a whole lot we can do just sitting around and hashtagging and liking. But when we start to get in relationship, that's when we see the shift happen. That's when we see that happens. And, again, people always ask Sarah and I, what can I do? They hear these awful headlines. What can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And what we will say to you is, there's not a silver bullet answer. There's things that we can do, and we'll get to that in a second. But truly getting in relationship with people and closer to these issues, however that may be. I know it's kind of hard during COVID, but this is a time where you can learn up. There is so much online right now. Take the time, take 15 minutes to listen to a podcast. Go and follow a bunch of people in a certain space that have all kinds of perspectives. Remain anchored in your biblical Christian faith, but take some time to learn, so that when COVID restrictions and all these things get lifted, you can feel a bit more confident about stepping forward into some of these spaces. So, Sarah, obviously, our passion right now is about immigrants and refugees, and the headlines are hard. And so for us, you got into this space. I want to say you got into this space because you started dating someone who was undocumented at the time, and you were like, no big deal, get in line, here we go. And then it just became this whole thing like, whoa, this whole system is screwy, right? And I came to this because it's part of the pro-life narrative, the holistic pro-life ethic that I believe so much in. And why would you say you keep staying in it? Because it's draining. And I've only been deep diving into this for several years, and you've been doing this for a long time. What keeps you passionate about this? Why do you keep leaning in, girl? It's exhausting.
I mean, I think, some of what we've just been talking about, proximity is key. I mean, for when there's headlines that say, hey, we're going to close our borders to this country, or we're going to change this, we have friends and family reaching out to us via WhatsApp asking, wait, does this mean we can't come there anymore? Like, what's happening on your side? And so, for me, I think it's really challenging to stay committed to an issue, but commitment to people is for life. and
good.
And it's, that proximity to my friends and family who these headlines directly impact, that keeps us involved. I think especially for something with immigration, where I am born with citizenship and people that we love and care for don't have access to be able to vote or to call their representatives because they're literally not represented in these decision-making rooms. And so, it keeps that connection. And I think, sometimes it's really hard, even, and especially when we watch reactions to different things, to recognize for how many people, because it's not proximate, it's easier to say, well, that's so sad, but it's unfortunate and I can't do anything about it.
Right.
And, but when you're connected, when you're proximate, there's just a long-standing commitment that you kind of can't walk away from. And it also, the headlines might be hard, policies might be hard, but people and friendships and birthday parties and graduation parties, all of that is life-giving and keeps us connected to really the reality of, we're talking about people.
We're talking about people. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
again, the thing about this study is at the very end, it says, what can I do? And people ask that all the time. And we do have this sheet just as a download on our website at womenofwelcome.com. So if you ever want to hand it out or whatever, you have it. But it's also in the study, and it's just like a menu. So where can you enter in? What do you feel like works for you? Because it's not just advocating. I mean, we've seen that the advocacy that you all have joined us in has really moved the needle on some things, and we're super thankful for that. But hopefully we will get to a day where we're not having to advocate for something every other week, right? Who knows? We'll see. But there's learning to be had. There's relationships to be developed. There are books to read. There's just so much to help endear you and connect you in this space that will help inform and change the narrative, not only for you, but for those around you, and enter into those peacemaking spaces. So we're going to close this week with, we had a really beautiful conversation with Jill Briscoe last month about kind of entering into peace. And she is just a legend of the faith. If you don't know Jill Briscoe, she's just phenomenal. She served with World Relief. She's been on the board. She's been a missionary on every continent of the U.S. And when I asked her, can you explain why immigration is a biblical issue? And she said, are there people who don't think that it is? How is it not? And I said, well, it's become quite political. She said, what's political about loving people? I said, well, it gets complicated, Jill. So we talk about that. So that's great. And then this last month, we talked with Joe Sexton, and she was just talking about sometimes the obedience, sometimes the success. Everyone's looking to be successful at whatever they're doing. She said, sometimes the success is just showing up. Sometimes it's just being obedient. And so look at this list of what can you do, and enter and say, all right, I'm going to show up how, right? And so we're going to close this week 4. We've really, really enjoyed doing this study with you. We're going to keep promoting it this fall. And so it's a quick 4-week study to just do with your girlfriends or to do by yourself. You can do it on your phone every morning. And then we'll have a new spring study for you. So we'll make an announcement about that soon. But we're going to read this original poem that Jill Briscoe wrote called Meet Me on the Mountaintop. Why don't you start, Sarah?
Have you met him at the lakeside? Do you hear his still small voice? Did he call you there to follow him and said, you have a choice? And did half of you say, yes, Lord, and have half a mind to start? Did you think he didn't notice when you gave him half your heart?
He saw it on the day he met disciples on the mount and gave them all another chance to make their whole lives count. Some said that day, what comes my way, O Lord, I'll do my part. Dear Lord, I'll be obedient. I'll give you all my heart.
I'll love for you and speak for truth and tell the gospel story. I'll live this day forward to give you all the glory. Wherever you send me, use me, send me, I will speak for you. Help me glorify your name, be with me, see me through.
So as we leave the mountaintop, will you go for him or stay? Continue on half-heartedly or give it all away? Will you yield yourself from this day on, receive the Spirit's call? Say, Jesus, I give all to you, not half my heart, my all. So thank you, Jill, for those beautiful words. I remember the first time she stated that poem at a If Gathering conference, and she said, "Do you think you didn't notice when you gave him half your heart?" And I just was like pinned to the wall. I was like, woof. Yeah. So take that as a challenge. Take that to the Lord in prayer. We hope you'll continue to do this if you're just joining us or just jumping in. This is a free download at womenofwelcome.com. There is a link in the bio, or there is a link on Facebook as well. So ladies, thanks so much for joining us. We will be making an announcement soon about our spring study that's going to be coming out, but we hope you're enjoying this fall, and we will be in touch soon.